The first time I ever signed a phrase in American Sign Language, my palms were damp with nerves. I wasn't in a classroom or at a workshop. I was standing in a glass-walled conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing above, a line of executives seated at the polished table. And across from me sat a visitor who would change the course of my week, my career, and, in ways I couldn't have imagined, my understanding of character. It was supposed to be an ordinary Monday meeting. I was there to take notes, to keep the coffee filled, to be invisible, really. But when our guests were ushered in, one of them, a tall, confident man with kind eyes, set his notepad down and looked at the table without a word. I noticed the small device in his ear, then the subtle way his colleague leaned closer and began to interpret. My chest tightened. He was deaf. Most of the room froze for a beat, unsure how to proceed. There was a politeness, yes, but also that awkward distance people sometimes create when they don't know how to bridge the gap. In that silence, I remembered a tiny thing. Weeks earlier, scrolling through videos online, I had paused on one that taught a simple greeting in ASL. Just 3 short words. My fingers hesitated, but my heart knew. I signed. Nice to meet you. The visitor's face lit up, not just a smile, but a spark that transformed the atmosphere. He tapped his chest gently, signed back, and for a moment, the whole room softened. Chairs shifted, tension melted, and the meeting began. But it didn't end there. Because after the handshakes and the polite goodbyes, as I gathered my papers and tucked my pen behind my ear, the CEO of our company, a man I'd barely spoken to before, caught my eye. "Walk with me," he said, his tone unreadable. And in that instant, I knew something had shifted. But was it the beginning of an opportunity, or a test I hadn't seen coming? One small act of kindness can echo far louder than we expect. When I first joined the company, I never imagined myself standing out. I was an assistant, efficient, organized, quietly dependable. My job was to make sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. The agendas printed, the coffee brewed just right, the pens lined up at each chair. If people noticed me at all, it was usually because something had gone wrong. That's why the CEO's voice rattled me so deeply. He was the kind of man who carried his authority like a second skin, tall, silver hair perfectly combed, suit always pressed as if he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. People lowered their voices when he entered a room. I had seen department heads sweat through presentations in front of him. And now he wanted me, to walk with him. We stepped into the corridor. That's when he turned to me. "You know sign language?" His tone wasn't harsh, but it was clipped, like every word was weighed. I swallowed. "Only a little, sir. Just a phrase or two. I learned it online." His eyes studied me, and for a second, I felt as though he could see straight into the jumble of my nerves. Then he asked, "Why did you use it?" The question surprised me. It wasn't how I knew it. It wasn't where I learned it. It was why. And suddenly, the memory came back so vividly. The day I had seen an older man struggling to order coffee at a cafe, the barista growing impatient, the man finally pointing and walking away with something he hadn't wanted. That helplessness in his eyes had stuck with me. I told the CEO that story. He nodded slowly, gaze drifting out the window. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Most people don't bother to see. You did." I didn't know it then, but that small exchange set the stage for a series of tests, silent, deliberate tests, that would draw me into the heart of this company's power struggles and family secrets. Tests I wasn't sure I was ready for. Sometimes, the quiet choices we make when no one's watching are the very ones that put us in the spotlight. The very next morning, my inbox pinged with an email that stopped me cold. It wasn't from my manager or even HR. It was from the CEO's office itself. Short. Precise. "You will be assisting with the upcoming executive sessions this week. Report directly to me at 8 a.m. sharp." I reread it 3 times. I had never worked directly under him. Assistants didn't get plucked out of their routines unless something unusual was happening. My stomach nodded with equal parts dread and curiosity. When I arrived at his office, I noticed immediately how different the atmosphere felt. No clutter, no idle chatter, not even the faint smell of burnt coffee that usually wafted through our floor. His space was silent, almost austere, the city skyline flooding in through wide glass panes. On the corner of his desk sat a small, worn leather book with a ribbon tucked into it. A journal? I didn't dare ask. He looked up from his notes and motioned for me to sit. There are a few things you need to understand if you're going to be in this room, he said. His tone wasn't unkind. It was measured, as though he was setting terms for a game I didn't yet know I'd entered. First, he continued, you will observe, not interrupt. Speak only if spoken to. Second, you will treat every guest as if they are the most important person you've ever met.
No shortcuts. No assumptions.
And third, he paused, leaning forward slightly, his eyes locking onto mine. Sometimes the smallest gesture reveals the largest truth about a person. I will be watching how you handle yourself. I felt my throat tighten. These weren't just ground rules. Executives from different countries were flying in, partners who held the company's future in their hands. Among them, I learned, were people who didn't always fit the corporate mold, one who was deaf, another who struggled with English, even one who had suffered a stroke years before and now spoke haltingly. It dawned on me then, I hadn't been pulled into these sessions to shuffle papers. The CEO was measuring something else, something far less tangible than skill. And though he never said it aloud, I knew the rules weren't about etiquette. They were about character. True tests in life rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary moments, asking us quietly who we really are. The first session unfolded like a play, where every actor had rehearsed except me. The table gleamed, voices overlapped, documents shuffled, and the CEO watched from his high-backed chair like a conductor waiting to see which note would falter first. I kept my focus sharp, passing water glasses before anyone had to ask, keeping the agenda visible, jotting notes with precision. But it wasn't the tasks that mattered. I knew it.
He knew it.
He was watching the spaces in between. The puzzles began almost imperceptibly. One afternoon, a guest from Japan arrived, his English halting, his voice trembling with hesitation. As he fumbled for words, I noticed the CEO's eyes flick to me, then back to the speaker. It was as if he were saying without saying, will you rush him or will you wait? So I waited. I leaned forward slightly, nodded gently with each phrase, letting him know he wasn't alone in that silence. Eventually, his words came clearer. His relief was visible. When the session ended, he bowed deeply. To me, not the executives. The CEO's gaze lingered on that moment, unreadable. Another puzzle appeared the next day, when the deaf visitor returned. This time, his interpreter was late. For a moment, the room shifted uncomfortably, people half-whispering, unsure how to start without him. I could feel the visitor shrinking into himself, isolated. Without thinking, I signed again, clumsy but earnest. Coffee? His eyes lit up, and he chuckled silently. The room softened. By the time the interpreter arrived, the visitor was at ease, already scribbling jokes on a notepad to share with me. Once again, the CEO's eyes found mine across the table. And then there was the scarf. On the third day, a cold draft seeped into the boardroom from an overworked vent. One of the older guests, a frail man with a cane, shivered visibly but said nothing. I had no blanket, no spare jacket. Only the scarf I had worn to work, a simple gray wool one, frayed at the edges. Without hesitation, by the end of that week, I realized the CEO hadn't just pulled me into his orbit. He had set up a quiet maze, full of human puzzles. And my choices, small as they seemed, were the clues he was collecting. Sometimes the riddles life gives us don't come on paper. They come in the pauses, in the shivers, in the searching eyes of another soul. By Friday, I was exhausted in a way I had never felt before, not from work itself, but from the constant vigilance of being watched, weighed, silently measured. Every gesture I made in those rooms felt like it carried double meaning. I lay awake at night, replaying the scarf moment, the coffee sign, the pauses I had allowed, wondering, did I pass? Or did I misstep without realizing it? That morning, just before the final session of the week, the CEO asked me to bring a folder into his private office. His desk was immaculate, but the small leather-bound journal I had noticed earlier was open now, lying face up. My eyes flicked to it before I could stop myself, and for a split second, I saw sketches, not numbers, not strategy charts, but drawings of hands. Hands in different positions, fingers curved, palms open. It was ASL. I froze. The CEO looked up at me, caught my glance, and for the first time that week, he smiled. A real smile, not the thin professional kind. "You've guessed it, haven't you?" he said. My throat was dry. You sign?" "Not fluently," he admitted, closing the journal gently. "But my younger sister was deaf. She passed away many years ago." He tapped the cover with surprising tenderness. "She used to tell me that people reveal their hearts in how they treat those who cannot answer back quickly, or at all." A silence fell between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Suddenly the puzzles made sense. The scarf, the pauses, the coffee. They weren't random situations at all. He had engineered them, or at the very least, chosen to spotlight them, to see if I would respond with instinctive kindness or rehearsed politeness. "Do you understand now?" he asked. I nodded slowly, my chest swelling with both relief and something deeper, a strange blend of honor and fear. Because in that moment, I realized this was bigger than me. This wasn't about impressing a CEO. This was about carrying forward a legacy I had never been told about, but which I had now been entrusted to uphold. The revelation left me shaken, but it also lit a quiet flame inside me. It wasn't just a test anymore. It was a calling. The truest discoveries often come not with fanfare, but with a whisper that changes how we see everything. After that conversation, I thought the pressure might ease. Instead, it deepened. Now that I understood the meaning behind the tests, I could no longer pretend ignorance. Every action I took seemed. The older gentleman with the cane had kept it folded neatly and handed it back to me before the session began. But when I reached for it, the CEO intercepted, holding the fabric in his hand. He examined it slowly, the frayed edges, the faint perfume of winter that clung to it. Then, to my shock, he placed it on the conference table. "Tell me," he asked, looking directly at me in front of everyone, "why would an assistant give away something of their own, instead of simply adjusting the thermostat?" The room fell silent. My face burned. I felt every executive's eyes on me. Was he exposing me? Testing me again? My mind raced. Finally, I said softly, because the man was cold then. Adjusting the thermostat would take too long. The scarf was already in my hands. The CEO held my gaze for a long beat. Then he placed the scarf back down and nodded, as though he'd found the answer he was looking for. The meeting went on, but I couldn't shake the tremor in my chest. Later that week, the complications grew sharper. Rumors began to swirl among my colleagues. Why is she in every high-level meeting? What is she doing in his office? I caught whispers in the break room, sidelong glances when I walked by. Some of the senior staff began treating me with cold politeness, others with open suspicion. The deaf visitor returned once more, this time bringing a small gift, a hand-carved keychain shaped like a dove. He pressed it into my palm after the session, signing a single word I didn't know, then smiling as if I'd understand someday. But when I tucked it into my pocket, I caught one executive sneering, murmuring, "Teacher's pet." I realized then that kindness in these rooms was not without consequence. My every act of humanity was being noticed, not only by the CEO but by those who feared or resented the attention it drew. The tests were no longer private puzzles. They were public, messy, and charged with real risk. And as much as I wanted to retreat, to return to my quiet anonymity, something inside me whispered that it was too late to turn back. Sometimes, when we begin to live by higher values, the world around us pushes back, not to stop us, but to ask if we truly mean it. The breaking point came on a gray Wednesday morning. Rain streaked the glass walls of the boardroom, and the city below looked blurred, as if even the skyline was weary of watching us. The session had been tense from the start. Negotiations were stalling, tempers flaring. I sat in my usual corner with my notes, trying to make myself invisible. But then, in the middle of a heated exchange, one of the executives snapped at the deaf visitor. "We don't have time for this back and forth with the interpreter," he barked, throwing his pen onto the table. Can't we just move on without his input? The room froze. My stomach dropped. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. My voice cut through the silence. With respect, sir, his input is why we're all here. If we can't make space for it, then what's the point of this meeting? The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence I had faced before. My heart hammered so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. No assistant should ever speak that way to an executive, let alone in front of the CEO. The executive's face turned red. Excuse me? But before he could lash out, the CEO raised a hand. The room stilled. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of command. She's right. Sit down. The executive sputtered, but the CEO's gaze left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his chair. I wanted to shrink into myself, to disappear under the weight of so many eyes. But the deaf visitor was looking at me now, and he signed something simple. Thank you. His interpreter echoed it softly, but I didn't need the words. I understood. After the meeting, the CEO asked me to stay behind. My legs trembled as I approached him, certain that my outburst had overstepped. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice low. You've finally stopped reacting and started choosing. That's what I needed to see. For the first time, I understood. These weren't just tests of kindness. They were tests of courage, of whether I would risk something to defend dignity when it mattered most. And that, I realized, was the confrontation he had been leading me toward all along. The measure of our character is not how kind we are when it's safe, but how steadfast we remain when kindness costs us something. The breaking point came on a gray Wednesday morning. Rain streaked the glass walls of the boardroom, and the city below looked blurred, as if even the skyline was weary of watching us. The session had been tense from the start. Negotiations were stalling, tempers flaring. I sat in my usual corner with my notes, trying to make myself invisible. But then, in the middle of a heated exchange, one of the executives snapped at the deaf visitor. We don't have time for this back and forth with the interpreter, he barked, throwing his pen onto the table. Can't we just move on without his input? The room froze. My stomach dropped. The interpreter stiffened. The visitor's face went still, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the quiet humiliation, sharp as a blade. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. My voice cut through the silence. With respect, sir, his input is why we're all here. If we can't make space for it, then what's the point of this meeting? The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence I had faced before. My heart hammered so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. No assistant should ever speak that way to an executive, let alone in front. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of command. She's right. Sit down. The executive sputtered, but the CEO's gaze left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, he sank back into his chair. I wanted to shrink into myself, to disappear under the weight of so many eyes. But the deaf visitor was looking at me now, and he signed something simple. Thank you. His interpreter echoed it softly, but I didn't need the words. I understood. After the meeting, the CEO asked me to stay behind. My legs trembled as I approached him, certain that my outburst had overstepped. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice low. You've finally stopped reacting and started choosing. That's what I needed to see. For the first time, I understood. These weren't just tests of kindness. They were tests of courage, of whether I would risk something to defend dignity when it mattered most. And that, I realized, was the confrontation he had been leading me toward all along. The measure of our character is not how kind we are when it's safe, but how steadfast we remain when kindness costs us something. 2 days later, when the week's last session ended, I expected to slip back into my quiet routines. Instead, the CEO asked me once more to walk with him. This time, his steps were slower, deliberate, as though he was weighing what he was about to do. We ended up in his private office, the city glowing behind him in late afternoon light. He gestured for me to sit, but my nerves wouldn't let me. I stood with my hands clasped. That's when he opened the leather-bound journal and slid it across the desk toward me. Do you know why I watched you so closely? He asked. I swallowed. Because of your sister. He nodded.
Yes.
She taught me that strength is not measured by how loud a voice carries, but by how much space a heart makes for others. I've looked for people who understood that lesson all my life. Rarely do I find them. His gaze fixed on me, piercing yet gentle. But you didn't. For the first time, I saw the legacy the CEO was guarding. Not wealth, not reputation, but the memory of his sister and the simple truth she had lived by. And in some way I still couldn't explain, he was passing a piece of that legacy to me. From that day forward, the scarf and the dove became my reminder. To see, to pause, to give, to defend. Small acts, yes, but ones that ripple outward more than we ever know. The greatest inheritance we receive is not gold or titles, but the responsibility to carry forward the values that keep our humanity intact. I often think back to that single, trembling moment when I first signed "Nice to meet you." At the time, it felt like nothing, just a nervous gesture, a clumsy attempt at connection. But it opened a door I didn't know existed. A door into a week of quiet trials, unexpected courage, and a legacy I was never meant to inherit, yet somehow did. The scarf with the dove keychain now hangs by my front door. Every morning before I leave for work, I touch it lightly. Not as a superstition, but as a reminder. You never know when the simplest kindness will become the moment someone remembers for a lifetime. I still walk the same halls at work. My role hasn't changed dramatically. I'm not a high-ranking executive, and maybe I never will be. But I carry something more enduring than a title. I carry the knowledge that character, lived out in small, ordinary choices, can ripple all the way to the top floor and beyond. And I think often of the CEO's sister, though I never met her. I wonder if she would smile to know that her memory shaped me, a stranger, years later. In a way, I feel as though she sits on my shoulder sometimes, whispering reminders to see with my heart before my eyes. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not underestimate the small choices. A scarf, a pause, a smile, a simple phrase in a language you barely know, these things matter. They can pierce through pride, bridge impossible gaps, and even soften the hardest rooms. So the next time you're faced with a choice, whether to ignore or to notice, to look away or to lean in, remember, someone is always watching. Maybe not a CEO, maybe not anyone you'll ever meet again. But kindness leaves an imprint, even in silence. And if my story reminds you of a time you chose compassion over convenience, I'd love for you to share it. Because those stories, passed from one person to another, are how legacies live on. At the end of the day, titles fade, fortunes shift, and reputations dim. But dignity given, humanity defended, kindness offered, those are the things that last. And sometimes, all it takes to begin is 3 small words, signed with shaky hands. Nice to meet you.